Hi, budding structural engineers. Welcome to the structural engineering lectures. Uh, in, welcome to the advanced steel designs. In the previous class, we have seen a single circuit transmission line tower, its analysis, as well as the design forces. Right. In today's class, we shall see the analysis and designs of cold formed light gauge steel structures, analysis and designs conforming to Indian Standard Codes IS 801 1975 Code of Practice for use of cold formed light gauge steel structural members in general buildings and constructions, and as well as IS 811 1987 specification for cold formed light gauge structural steel sections. This is akin to that of the steel tables. Then the third one is SP 65 Handbook for Structural Engineers 5 cold formed light gauge steel structures. Right now, let us move to the discussion, student. Before we move to the discussions, let us see a few photographs of light gauge steel structures, wherein we will try to understand how the light gauge steel structures look in real practice. Right, this I'm just showing a photograph of G+1 storied building built up with light gauge steel sections, cold formed light gauge steel sections. Right, that is how the truss part in the first floor, whereas the ground floor is consisting of the decking part. Right, and all the wall panels are also made with light gauge panel sections, right? Light gauge steel structures with panel sections, and even we do have the wall claddings also, right? This is unfinished work, right? Only what we are able to see here is the steel frame only, steel frame alone we are able to see. Right now, next one is similarly this photograph shows another photograph of G+1 storied building, wherein we do have the entire framing ready, so that now we'll attach the wall claddings, so that now the building will be in the finished format like this. Right, and for now we are able to see the building half the building, right, purely unfinished without the wall cladding and the paneling work. Right, the remaining half is with purely the light gauge skeleton consisting of the columns and beams, right, purlins, etc., and truss, etc. Right, that is how. Now if I see how the paneling can be done, this is how it looks. Right, this is how that uh, studs, these verticals are called studs, and the horizontals are what called the tracks, where on either side of this we can attach plasterboard. Right, now like this. Right, we can say at the bottom. Right, either we can use a single plasterboard, right, on either side of this stud. Right, and inside these two studs what forms a cavity. Right, however, that cavity can be used for insulation purpose also. Right, this is what the single plasterboard only on one side. Right, whereas on either side with a single plaster board only. Right, whereas we do have here two plaster boards. Right, this is what called double plasterboard. Right, double plasterboard attached to each of the studs. Right, and the gap between these two, the cavity, may be used for insulation purpose. Right, or for other purpose also, maybe for electric wiring purpose or others, etc. Right, or for acoustic purpose. Right, and here this is the external insulation. Even now I do have one plasterboard followed by external insulation done, and followed by the plasterboard from outside. That is how it can be done. Or alternatively, what we can do is like this. Right, we do have two layers of fire resistant plasterboards. Right, like this, two layers of the fire resistant plasterboard, which is attached to the light gauge steel frame, right? And in between these we have this yellow part is what called mineral wool, right? And even we would have these wall ties which are connected to the light gauge steel frame, right? From which what are supported are these brick claddings are also supported for external surface, right? And even in between this wall cladding, right, we would have insulated sheeting board right? Or alternatively, even we may have an arrangement like this also, right, where light this is another schematic of the same, right? Light steel frame to which what is connected is two layers of the fire resistant plasterboard, right? Another schematic, right? Mineral wool insulation is inserted here, right? And this is how the sheeting board, and this is the rigid insulation board. And even we can have the vertical rail fixed to this C section, so that there we can have the wall claddings are as appropriate, or the skin materials. Nowadays even we are using the skin materials also, right? And this is how the different schematics of the uh, light gauge steel structures, right? Now once we examine this, let us see how the code helps in arriving at the analysis and designs of these light gauge steel structures, right? These are IS 801 1975, followed by I do have IS 811 1987, right? And followed by the third one is the SP65, right? Which is the handbook, which is SP65 1980 handbook for structural engineers, cold formed light gauge steel structures, right? Now let us see in this from this code book what are the different topics that are covered. Now the section 1 deals with the commentary, right? Commentary of this IS 801 code book, and followed by this section 2 deals with the design tables and design curves, as well as design curves, which can be used readily for ready reference for the designs, followed by the third section deals with the design examples. Some 7 examples are given how each of these IS 801 codal specifications can be used, right? Now if I move to the discussions, right, I hope student you are understanding the discussions. Now we'll move to the introduction part, right? Whereas just now we have seen in the photographs that light gauge members are cold formed from steel sheets or strips, thickness of framing members, beam, joists, studs, etc., generally ranging from just 1.2 meter, 1.2 mm to 4 mm thick, 1.2 to 4 mm thick only, right? For floor and wall panels, and for long span roof decks, from 1.2 mm to 2.5 mm, and for standard roof deck and wall cladding from 0.8 mm to 1.2 mm. This is how for different type of users, different thicknesses, right? And these limits correspond to normal design practice, but should not be understood to restrict the use of the material of larger or smaller thickness. This is just in general, right? However, in India, light gauge members are widely used for bus body construction as well as the railway coaches, etc. And the thickness of these members vary from 1 mm to 3.2 mm. 1 mm to 3.2 mm. And next we do have uh, the forming is done in press brakes or by cold rolling. Light gauge members can either be cold rolled in rolls or by press brakes from flat steel, generally not thicker than 12.5 mm. For repetitive mass production, they are formed mostly most economically by cold rolling, while for small quantities of specific shapes are most economically produced on press brakes, right? Now, however, the latter processor or process with its great versatility of shape variation makes this type of construction as adaptable to special requirements as reinforced concrete is in its field use. Now, however, presently light gauge members are produced in India by both press brake system as well as by cold forming system. These members are connected together mostly by spot welds, cold riveting and special fasteners. Now, let us move to in which situations these cold formed members can be used, right? However, this can be used in in preference to the hot rolled sections in the following situations, right? One, where moderate loads and spans make the thicker hot rolled shapes uneconomical. Just for example, 1 and 2 storied commercial and industrial structures, just now we have seen like this, right? 1 and 2 storied commercial or residential buildings like this, just now we have seen, right? Now, next one, where it is desired that load carrying members also provide useful surfaces. For example, floor panels and roof decks mostly installed without any shoring or wall panels, right? That also we can observe from the same illustration, right? As well as the third one is where sub assemblies of such members can be prefabricated in the plant and reducing site erection to a minimum of simple operations. For example, subassembly panel framing up to 3 meter by 4 meters and more for structures listed in A, standardized package shed type utility buildings, etc. Therefore, for under these situations, these cold formed members or structures are preferred compared to that of the hot rolled steel sections. However, now let us move to what are the different shapes of the structural framing elements or members that are available. Right? This is of the student, right? The light gauge shapes for structural framing, light gauge shapes, right? This is how this shape 1, 2, 3, 4, right, and 5, 6. All these are unsymmetrical sections, right? Whereas whereas 7, 8 here onwards we do have the point symmetric sections. We'll see the definitions what is point symmetric sections, etc., right? That 9, 10, 11, all these are the symmetric sections, right? Whereas this 12 is akin to that of the 4 only, but for this horizontally oriented, this is used for the connecting the sheetings to that of the main frame, right? Whereas this section 13 can also be used for the similar use, right? And as well as this shape 13 let us see these uses also, students, right? These sections shapes 2 to 4, 2, 4, 6 where lips are used to stiffen the thin flanges. Generally these are having the disadvantage of unsymmetrical, whereas these shapes 7 to 11, just now we have seen that they are having an advantage of symmetry, whereas these shapes 7, 8, 10 and 11 are used for trusses and lattice girders. This, right, 7, 8, 10, 11, 7 can be used for top chord beams, right? 8 can be used for chords, right? 7, 8, 10, 11, whereas 10 can be used for the truss members and 11 can also be used for truss members, whereas this ninth shape can be used for bottom chord members for a truss, bottom chord member for a truss, right? That is how the different uses of these sections. And coming to that of the other shapes, right? Shape 9, which is lacking the edge distance on vertical sides, is better adapted for use as a tension member, right? Now let us see this shape 9. This can be here we don't have any lips, therefore it is generally used as a tension member, right? Now coming to the top, the other shapes we do have like this, right? The shapes 12 and 13 are used as girts and eave struts. Right? Now let us see these 12th and 13th shapes, right? 12th, right? This is how the 12th can be used as girt, whereas this can be used as eave strut, right? Now coming to the top, the other shapes 14, 15, 16, etc., right? Therefore here the shapes 14 and 15 are two varieties of eye shapes. The former better adapted for use as studs or columns, and the 15th shape is generally used for joists and beams, right? This section 14th can generally be used as a column section now, because it is somewhat heavier compared to the top. This shape 15, right? Whereas this shape 15 can be used for the girder sections. However, both are connected by means of spot welding, right? Now here a channeled lip is connected with another channeled lip. Here there is a gap, whereas two channeled lips back to back, right? Lipped channels back to back, right? Whereas for one side of the lipped channel section, I do have two channels, unlipped channel, two channels which are unlipped, right? Then the shape 15 is formed. Now let us move to the other shapes, right? The shapes 16 and 17 can be used as we have used that of the shapes 14 and 15, right? 16 and 17 are almost used again to the top. These 16, this can be used as the studs, and 17, right? This can also be used as a stud, right? Now coming to the top, the shapes 18, 19 onwards, where these can be used, the code says that these shapes 18 and 19 represent the closed members particularly favorable in compression, and former primarily for columns, the latter for compression cords or trusses, right? This is for compression, or purely for compression, because this is now box section now, whereas this is for compression member with the compression cords of the truss, right? Whereas the shape 20 shows one of the variety of open web joists with cord shaped for nailing, and shape 21 shows section similar to that of the cords of the shape 20 connected directly to form a nailed stud, right? Now this is how we do have these two more shapes 20 and 21. Now once we see these the uses of the different shapes, now let us move to the other shapes such as decks and panels, right? Now within that, the first one I do have the standard roof decks. The standard roof decks are usually 58 mm deep with rib spacing of 130 mm, are used on spans between the purlins up to 5 meters, right? However, these second one is long span roof decks are used up to spans of 6 meter or more, greater than or equal to 6 meter, and which means that the purlins in most cases may not be used, right? Or the purlins, without the purling itself I can use, because I do have here the depth more compared to that of the previous case, right? Now however, the chief application for these shapes is the industrial buildings, right? Generally we will be using these in the industrial buildings, or with relatively long roof spans in the case of workshops, or that of the say schools, right? Now coming to the top, the next shape, this is how the floor and roof deck wall panel shapes, different wall panel shapes, right? This just now we have seen curtain wall panels, right? Floors and roof panels, the third one is this one. Floors and roof panels are made to cover spans 3 meters to 10 meters and they are usually cellular in shape. That is how even just now we have seen in this figure that they are cellular in shape, and permit a wide variety of ancillary uses, right? The acoustic treatment is obtained by perforating bottom surfaces and installed sound absorbing elements such as glass fiber insulation in cells, right? Electrification of the entire floor is achieved by permanent installation of the wiring in the cells, right? However, recessed lighting may be installed in the spaces between the cells, right? Even recessed lighting may also be used, right, for lighting purpose, right? Now that is how the different uses of these floor and roof panels. Whereas the last one is that of the curtain wall panels, just now I have shown in the previous discussion, right? These curtain wall panels consist of either of single sheet siding or of cellular insulated wall panels, right? Advantage of these systems are lightweight, which reduces the cost of main framing and foundations. This is the main advantage of this lightweight or light gauge steel structures. Right? One, it reduces the cost of the main framing as well as the cost of the foundation. Two, the speed of construction. Three, absence of shoring or other temporary supports. I don't require any support, right, for floors and roofs. The next one is fourth one is immediate availability. I can just cache elsewhere and I can erect here, right? And fifth one is adaptability to later changes and addition. I can do alterations at a quicker pace, right? I can add, delete, etc. And suitability to perform enumerated ancillary functions. Just now we have seen we can use for acoustic purpose or just running the wires in between the voids. This is the different advantage of these light gauge steel structures. Now once we see this, let us move to the definition, students. I hope you are understanding the discussions. And now let us see the definitions, right? The first one is stiffened compression element. Right? Means that is how I'm just showing an angle here, right? Where I do have this is not having any lip, right? Whereas this leg is connected with the lip. Therefore, in such a case, right, this leg is called the stiffened compression element, whereas this leg where I don't have any lip, right? This is how I don't have any lip here, right? Here for this leg, right? Therefore, this is what called unstiffened compression element. Right? Now, next one. Therefore, all these are, this is how stiffened, right? Stiffened, right? Because this is stiffened by means of these lips, right? This is stiffened by means of these lips, right? Even we can see that these are stiffened by means of these, right? Even these are stiffened by these lips, right? These flanges are these webs are stiffened by this web, right? Likewise, this is called stiffened, whereas this flange is what called unstiffened, right? Whereas this being a closed column shape, all the four elements are what called stiffened compression elements, right? Next one is unstiffened compression element, just now I told, right? Whereas here I don't have any lip, therefore this leg is what referred to as unstiffened compression element, right? Therefore this is how I don't have any lip here, therefore both of these are, even this lip section itself is now unstiffened. Lip section itself is unstiffened, right? This is how the unstiffened compression elements, right? Not the member. Within that I do have elements, right? The next one is multiple stiffened elements and sub-elements, student, right? That is how for floor panels we may be generally having multiple stiffened elements like this, right? One groove, the second groove, one trough, second trough, so on and so forth, right? And this is how even this itself is stiffened by additional angle here, right? Light gauge steel section, right? So that this is what called multiple stiffened here, right? This is already stiffened by this lip, whereas even now this is stiffened by this support, right, as well as at the other end by web, right. This is what the multiple stiffened elements, right. Now next definition is flat width ratio. Flat width ratio means it is a ratio of the flat width W exclusively of exclusive of edge fillets, right, to the thickness, right, leaving this edge fillet to that of this thickness, right. This is what called the flat width ratio, right. Here from in this figure, this is what, right, leaving these curved regions, right, up to the starting of this curved region to the end of this sorry, starting of this straight portion to the end of this straight portion, beyond which curved portions are there. That is straight portion. This straight portion is what called the flat width W, right, to its thickness, right. That is all W by T, etc. Right. Now next one is effective design width. Generally, where the flat width W of an element is reduced for design purposes, the reduced design width B, this one, right, reduced design width B is termed as the effective width or effective design width, right. There is a small b, not W. W is the width actually, right, whereas small b is the effective width, right. W is the actual width, small b is the effective design width or effective width, right. Now next one, torsional flexural buckling, right. However, a mode of buckling in which the compression member can be bent and twisted simultaneously, like this, can be bent as well as twisted simultaneously, twisting simultaneously. Generally, this will be happening for channels as well as that of the angles which are subjected to unsymmetrical buildings, right. Therefore, there the torsional flexural buckling will occur, right. And next definition is a point symmetric section, right. A section symmetrical about a point, centroid point, such as Z section, having equal flanges, right, either with lip or without lip, right. Therefore, this is point symmetry of this Z section without and with lips respectively, right. The different yield stresses Fi of the cold formed steel sections that are produced from the steel strips conforming to IS 1079 are like this. The yield stresses of these steels are like this. The grade ST34 yield stress, minimum yield stress is 2100 kg per centimeter square or 210 Newton per mm square approximately. ST42 2400 kg per meter square or 240 Newton per mm square. ST50 3000 kilonewton per 3000 kg per centimeter square or 300 Newton per mm square. ST52 3600 kg force per centimeter square or 360 Newton per mm square, right. Once we see these codal the definition, students, now let us move quickly to that of the IS 801 1975, which is the Indian Standard Code of Practice for use of cold formed light gauge steel structural members in general building construction. Just now we have seen all these, right, where it can be used, right, what is called a cold form section. Now I'll skip off this. Even we have seen this definition, students, right, in IS from IS 801. It's a commentary from the commentary we have seen this, right. Now even up to the yield stresses we have seen, right. Now let us see the next subheading as the properties of sections, right. The properties of the sections, right. These properties of the sections are available in the same SP 65, right. Structural steel akin to that of the structural steel tables. The properties are also available in IS 811. That will say, right. Even now the code says that the properties of the section shall be as per 5.2.1 and 5.2.5. Now let us see those, right. What are those properties, right. Not only that, even properties of this stiffened, unstiffened compression elements, etc., right. Now the first one is properties of the stiffened compression elements, right. However, in computing the properties of the sections of flexural members and in computing the values of the Q, load factor, actually Q is what called load factor for compression members, the flat width ratio W of any stiffened compression element having a flat width ratio larger than W by T limb as hereunder defined shall be considered as being reduced for design purposes to an effective width B or BE, which is determined in accordance with the provisions of 5.2.1.1 or 5.2.1.2. That we'll see how it should be calculated, right? However, these stiffened compression elements are generally located symmetrically about the center line of the element, right? Now, next one is these elements without intermediate stiffness. If if I want to calculate for load determinations, then flanges are fully effective. B is equal to W, right? B is equal to the effective width itself is the flat width W up to if W by T is not exceeding WT lim 1435 divided by square root of F. 1435 divided by square root of F, where F is the design stress that we'll see, right now, which is generally by default 0.6 Fy. We'll see during designs, right? Whereas for flanges with the W by T greater than W by T lim, just now defined here, 1435 by square root of F, then B by T is equal to 2120 divided by square root of F within bracket 1 minus 465 divided by W by T multiplied by square root of F. Now, exception. Flanges of closed square or rectangular tubes are fully effective. B is equal to W up to W by T lim is equal to 1540 divided by square root of F. For flanges with W by T larger than W by T lim, then B by T is given by 2120 divided by square root of F, 1 minus 420 divided by W by T square root of F, right? This is how for load determination. However, now code says that if at all these members are subjected to stresses produced by wind as well as earthquake forces, the effective design width shall be determined for 0.75 times the stress caused by wind or earthquake loads only, right? 75% of the stresses caused by wind or earthquake only, right? Now, let's say if I want to calculate these sectional properties for load calculations, just now we have seen, right, like this, right, for load calculation. Whereas if I want to calculate for deflection calculations, right, then flanges are fully effective up to W by T lim 1850 divided by square root of F, right? Whereas for flanges with the W by T greater than this W by T lim, then B by T is given by 2710 divided by square root of F, 1 minus 600 divided by W by T square root of F, right? This is how for flanges. However, the exception is the flanges of closed square or rectangular tubes are fully effective up to W by T lim is equal to 1990 divided by square root of F. For flanges with W by T larger than W by T lim, B by T is equal to 2710 divided by square root of F, 1 minus 545 divided by W by T square root of F, right? Where W by T is the flat width ratio and B is the effective design width in centimeters and F is the actual stress in the compression element computed on the basis of the effective design width in kg per centimeter square. That we'll see in the designs, right? Now, next codal specification is if at all I have to have multiple stiffened elements and wide stiffened elements with edge stiffeners, then the flat width ratio, if at all the flat width ratio exceeds the 60, the effective design width B of the sub element is given by this B by T is equal to B by T minus 0.1 W by T minus 60, right? Now, however, if W by T is in between 60 and 90, then AET is equal to alpha multiplied by AST, where alpha is equal to 3 minus 2 BE divided by W, 1 minus 1 by 31 minus BE divided by W multiplied by W by T, right? If W by T is greater than 90, then AET, effective area, actually that is effective area is equal to BE divided by W multiplied by AST, right? Now, in these expressions where AET and AST refer only to the area of the stiffener section exclusive of any portion of adjacent elements, right? Now, next, stiffness for compression elements, right? If at all I do have edge stiffeners, right, then these edge stiffeners, which are stiffened along each longitudinal edge parallel to the direction of stress by web, lip, or other stiffening means, then we should have a minimum amount of inertia I mean given by this formula 1.83 t to the power 4 under root w by t whole square minus 281200 divided by capital Fy. But however, this value shall not be less than 9.2 t to the power 4. Right? Then, however, the stiffener consists of a simple lip bent at right angles to the stiffener element. The required overall depth d minimum is given by this formula 2.8 t 6th root of w by t whole square minus 281200 divided by capital Fy. But however, it should not be less than 4.8 t. 4.8 t. A simple lip shall not be used as an edge stiffener with a flat width ratio greater than 60 mm. Flat width ratio greater than 60. Right? These are the discussions about the edge stiffness for compression elements, edge stiffness. Now let us move to the intermediate stiffness. I think you can just go through these intermediate stiffness also, students. Right? Now the code says that the equivalent thickness Ts is equal to under root 12 is divided by ws to the power 1 by 3, where I is the moment of inertia of the full area of the multiple stiffened element, right? That is of the equivalent thickness of the multiple stiffened elements, right? Now next one, maximum allowable overall flat width ratios, right? The first one, however, these are disregarding the intermediate stiffness. By disregarding the intermediate stiffness, then first one, the stiffened compression elements having one longitudinal edge connected to a web or flange element, the other stiffened by simple lip, then 60, any other kind of stiffener 90. The second one, the stiffened compression element with both longitudinal edges connected to other stiffened elements, right? This is 500, whereas for all unstiffened compression elements it is 60. Now next one, unusually wide flanges. If I do have unusually wide flanges, students, like this set, then the whether they are stiffened or unstiffened, in both the cases, that the width of this flange projecting beyond the web, like this, right? Beyond the web, that of the unusually wide flanges, that is given by w by t is equal to under root 126,500 t d divided by FAB multiplied by 100 CF divided by d whole to the power 1 by 4, where t is the flange thickness, d is the depth of the beam, and CF is the amount of the curling. I'll explain what is curling, right? Where FA is the average stress in the full unreduced flange width in kg per centimeter square, right? Now next one, we'll see the definition of the curling, student, at a later point, right? And next one is the maximum allowable web depth for members with unstiffened webs, h by t maximum is equal to 150, whereas with adequate for members which are provided with adequate means of transmitting concentrated loads or reactions, h by t maximum is equal to 200. Then next discussion is unusually short spans supporting concentrated loads, right? Where the spans of the beam is less than 30 Wt, 30 multiplied by Wt, right? Wt is already defined below. It carries one concentrated load or several concentrated loads spaced farther apart than 2 Wt. Then the maximum allowable ratio of effective design width to actual width is given here, L by Wt ratio, right? That maximum allowable ratio of effective design width to actual width, this ratio means that one, right? For L ratio of the length to this Wt, right? If that L by Wt is equal to 30, then the ratio is equal to 1, so on and so forth. If that ratio L by Wt is equal to 6, it now reduces to 55% only. That is how the reduction is happening from 1 to 0.55 as L by T is reducing. Now next, where L is the full span of the simple spans, right? And Wt is the width of the flange projection. Now Next subheading is the allowable design stresses. I hope student you are understanding the discussions. Now let us see the allowable design stresses. First one, the basic design stress, either for tension members or compression members or for flexural members, the permissible basic design stress or permissible stress is equal to F is equal to 0.6 Fy, where Fy is a specified minimum yield stress, right? And when the increase in steel strength resulting from cold work forming is utilized in accordance with 6.1.1, the basic design stress shall be once again given by F is equal to 0.6 Fya, where Fya is a average yield point of the full section, average yield point of the yield section, right? And this is how the different basic allowable yield stresses for different grades. 4 grades you already said, right? The minimum yield strength in kg force per mm square 21, right? Then or this is what called 210 Newton per mm square, 210 Newton per mm square grade, right? Or ST32. Then F is allowable design stress, which is 0.6 multiplied by 2100, which now works out 1250. 0.6 multiplied by 2100 kg force per centimeter square is 2100, or kg force per mm square is 21, right? That multiplied by 0.6 as per this definition, it works out 1250. Like that, 0.6 multiplied by 2400, 1450. 0.6 multiplied by 3000, 1800. 0.6 multiplied by 3600, 2160. These are the permissible or allowable basic allowable design stresses, F, right? Now next subheading, utilization of cold work of forming, right? However, allowable stresses shall be based upon the special minimum properties of the unformed steel, right? Utilization for steel for design purposes or any increase in steel strength that results from a cold forming operation is permissible, right? Now that is all, right? Methods and limitations are also given, student. You may just go through. I'm just skipping off this for want of time, right? Wind, earthquake, and combined forces, how they need to be calculated. You just go through that. I'm skipping up, right? Next subheading, compression on unstiffened elements, right? And compression FC in kg force per centimeter square on flat unstiffened elements, W by T not greater than 530 divided by square root of Fi, then Fc is equal to 0.6 Fi. W by T ratio is greater than 530 divided by Fi but not greater than 1210 divided by square root of Fi, then Fc is equal to Fi multiplied by 0.767 minus 3.1 divided by 10 to the power 4 W by T square root of Fi. For W by T greater than 1210 divided by square root of Fi but not greater than 25, then Fc is equal to 562,000 divided by W by T whole square. However, when the yield point of the steel is less than 2320 kg force per centimeter square, then W by T ratio between 530 divided by Fi and 25, then this Fc is given by 0.6 Fi, which is previously, but now it is given by Fc is equal to 0.6 Fi minus W by T minus 530 divided by Fi multiplied by 0.6 Fi minus 900 divided by 25 multiplied by 1 minus 21.2 divided by Fy. That is how the modification, if at all Fy is less than 2320 as well as W by T is in the range of 25 to 530 divided by Fy. That is the exception. Whereas for W by T between 25 to 60, for angle struts Fc permissible or allowable design stress Fc is equal given by 5,62,000 divided by W by T whole square, whereas for all other sections it is given by Fc is equal to 1390 minus 20 multiplied by W by T. Now I hope you are understanding these discussions. Now let us see, the next one is laterally unbraced beams. Whereas when bending is about the central axis, either it is I-shaped sections symmetrical about an axis in plan of the web or symmetrical channel I-shaped section, either of the two. However, when L square SXC divided by DYC is greater than 0.3 pi square E C H divided by Fy, sorry, CB divided by Fy, but less than 1.3 pi square E CB divided by Fy, then that laterally unbraced beams means permissible bending stress FB is given by 2 by 3 Fy minus Fy square divided by 5.4 phi square ECB multiplied by L square SXC divided by DIYC. However, when L square Sx divided by DIYC is equal to or greater than this value 1.8 pi square E CB divided by Fy, then FB is divided by this 0.6 pi square E CB DIYC divided by L square Sxc. Now, the second one, for point symmetrical Z-shaped sections, when L square Sx divided by DIYC is greater than this 0.8 pi square E CB divided by Fy but less than 0.9 pi square E CB divided by Fy, then FB is equal to 2 by 3 Fy minus pi square Y divided by 2.7 pi square ECB multiplied by L square Sx divided by DIYC. However, if L square Sxc divided by DIYC is equal to or greater than 0.9 pi square ECB divided by Fy, then FB permissible bending stress is given by 0.3 pi square ECB DIYC divided by L square Sxc. Right now, however, where you see the different notation, students, right? Where IYC is the moment of inertia of this compression section about the gravity axis, where Sxc is the compression section modulus and Cb is the bending coefficient. And it can be conservatively given by 1.75 plus 1.05 m1 divided by m2 plus 0.3 m1 divided by m2 whole square, but not more than 2.3, where m1 is the smaller bending moment and m2 is the larger bending moment. E is the Young's modulus, which is taken as 2074 000 kg force per centimeter square, and D is the depth of the section. Now, let us see the next subheading as the allowable stresses in web of beams. Right? Now, this is how the discussion, students, right? Where we do have the shear stresses in webs, right? Right? We have seen the permissible compressive stress, second one permissible bending stress. Now, third one is permissible shear stress in webs, right? For H by T not greater than 4590 divided by Fy, then FV permissible shear stress in web is given by this 4275 square root of Fy divided by H by T. However, a maximum value of 0.4 Fy, it cannot be greater than 0.4 Fy. Sorry, it is equal to 1275 square root of Fy divided by H by T, right? Whereas which H by T is greater than 4590 divided by square root of Fy, then Fe is equal to 5850000 divided by H by T whole square, right? Where Fi is a yield point or yield stress in kg force per centimeter square, and H is the clear distance between the flanges measured along the plane of the web, and T is the thickness of this web. Now, next one, bending stresses in webs, right? Bending stresses. The compressive bending stress in kg force per centimeter square is given by FCBW is equal to 36,560,000 divided by H by T whole square kg force per centimeter square. And sometimes we will be having the combined bending shear stresses in webs, right? Like this, right? Combined bending as well as the shear stresses in webs. Then in which case, now we can say that the combined formula is square root of FBW divided by FBW permissible whole square plus FV actual divided by permissible whole square. It should not be greater than 1. Therefore, this is what called unity check, where FBW is the actual compressive stress or compression stress at the junction of the flange with the web. At the junction of the flange with the web, like this, right? Flange with the web, right? And FBW is equal to 36,560,000 divided by H by T whole square kg force per centimeter square, and F is the actual average shear stress in the web divided by the web area, and FV, capital F is the allowable shear stress, as just now we have seen. However, in any case, it cannot be greater than 0.4 Fy. Right. Next one is web crippling. Web crippling of the beams. Right. You know what is web crippling, student? Right. Once a heavy load is thrown onto the flange, then obviously at the intersection of the flange with the web, a kink is formed. A kink is formed like this. Therefore, this is what called the web crippling. Web crippling. Therefore, as the thickness of the web is very small, to transfer this load safely to the bottom plane, therefore the crippling of the beam will occur like this, right? Crippling of the beam occurs at the intersection of the flange with the web, right? At the intersection of the flange with the web, right? At this region, that is what called web crippling of the beams, right? Then, however, if the flat width ratio h by t is equal to or less than 150, the concentrated loads and reactions shall not exceed the values of the P maximum given below, right? If value is more than this, then obviously the web crippling will occur. Web crippling will occur. Webs of the beams for which the ratio of h by t greater than 150 shall be provided with adequate means of transmitting the concentrated loads as well as the reaction directly into the web. Now let us see the first one. Beams having single unreinforced webs, right? Now first one, for end reactions are concentrated loads on outer ends of cantilevers for inside corner radius equal to or less than the thickness of sheets, then P maximum is equal to 70 t square multiplied by 98 plus 4.2 n by t minus 0.022 n by t h multiplied by h by t minus 0.011 h by t. That whole multiplied by 1.3 minus 0.33 Fy divided by 2320. That whole multiplied by Fy by 2320. Right. For other corner radii up to 40, the value of P maximum given by the above formula may be multiplied with 1.15 minus 0.15 r by t, right? Now next one, for reactions of interior supports located anywhere on the span, P maximum is given by 70 t square multiplied by 305 plus 230 n by t minus 0.009 n by t multiplied by h by t minus 0.5 h by t multiplied by 1.22 minus 0.22 Fy divided by 2320 multiplied by Fy divided by 2320. Right? That is how the maximum load for reactions of interior supports, right? For other corner radii up to 40, the value of P maximum given by the above formula is to be multiplied by a factor 1.06 minus 0.06 r by t, right? And also for the corner radii larger than 40, test shall be made in accordance with provision 9 of this code, right? And next one, the I beams made up of two channels connected back to back, like this, right? Back to back are for similar sections which provide a high degree of restraint against rotation of the web, such as I section made by welding two angles to a channel, right? Then first one, the end reactions are for concentrated loads on the outer ends of the cantilever, then P maximum is equal to t square Fy multiplied by 4.44 plus 0.558 square root of n by t, right? Or the second one is for the reactions of interior supports which are for the concentrated loads located anywhere on the span, then P maximum is equal to t square Fy multiplied by 6.66 plus 1.146 square root of n by t, right? This is how the web crippling for beams having single unreinforced webs. Now let us see the next discussion, students. I hope you are understanding these discussions. Now let us move to the next heading as the axially loaded compression members. Right? Now this is how the first one is the stresses, right? These are axially loaded compression members, right? The stresses, shapes not subjected to torsional flexural buckling, even we have seen what do you mean by torsional flexural buckling, student, right? Even also we have seen that this is how the section bends like this, right? Then this is what called torsional flexural buckling for an angle section in the previous discussions, right? For doubly symmetric shapes, closed cross-sectional shapes or cylindrical shapes and any other shapes which can be shown not to subjected to torsional flexural buckling, and for members braced against twisting, the average axial stress P by A in the compression member shall not exceed the following values, right? FAL allowable, except otherwise permitted by this class 6.6.1.1b, right? Now, if tendency ratio KL by R is less than CC by square root of Q, then allowable stress FAL is equal to 12 by 23 Q Fy minus 3 by 23 Q Fy whole square divided by pi square E multiplied by tendency ratio KL by R whole square. That is equal to 0.552 Q Fy minus Q Fy KL by R divided by 12,500, that whole square, right? If the tendency ratio KL by R is equal to or greater than CC by square root of Q, then F allowable stress FAL is equal to 12 pi square A divided by 23 lambda square, where lambda is equal to KL by R whole square, or that works out is equal to 10 60 80 000 divided by KL by R whole square or lambda square, where CC is equal to square root of 2 pi square E divided by Fy. And other notations you can go through, student, right? Where and further we have Q is equal to a load factor to be determined as follows, right? For members composed entirely of stiffened elements, right? Then Q is a ratio between the effective design area as determined from the effective design width of such elements and the full or gross area of the cross section, right? Now that we'll see during designs or using SP6. I'll once again explain that, right? And for members composed entirely of unstiffened elements, Q is the ratio between the allowable compression stress FC for weakest element of the cross section and the basic design stress F, where FE is defined in class 6.2 and F is defined in class 6.1. Third one, for members composed of both stiffened and as well as unstiffened elements, the factor Q is the product of the stress factor Qs computed as given in the second subheading of this above, and area factor QA as given in the first subheading of this outlined above, right? Except that the stress upon which QA is to be based shall be that value of the stress FA which is used in computing QS, and the effective area is to be used in computing QA shall include the full area of all unstiffened elements, right? Now this, if at all Q is equal to 1 unity, then steel is 2.22 mm or more thickness, and if tendency ratio KL by R is less than CC, these three conditions, right? Q is equal to 1 and thickness of the steel is equal to 2.29 mm or more, and tendency ratio is less than CC, then allowable stress FAL is equal to 1 minus KL by R whole square divided by 2CC square multiplied by Fy divided by that whole divided by 5 by 3 plus 3 by 8 KL by R divided by CC minus KL by R whole cubed divided by 8 C cubed, 8 CC cubed, right? That is how the load factors Q can be obtained. We'll see using a numeric problem, student, right? Now next one, singly symmetric and non-symmetric shapes of open cross section are intermittently fastened singly symmetrical components of built-up shapes having Q is equal to 1, which may be subjected to torsional flexural buckling, right? There is a particular case if at all Q is equal to 1 and they are subjected to torsional flexural buckling, right? Then for sigma TFO greater than 0.5 Fy, then FA2 is equal to 0.522 Fy minus Fy square divided by 7.67 sigma TFO. Whereas if for sigma TFO less than or equal to 0.Fy, then FA2 is equal to 0.522 sigma TFO, right? Where FA2 is allowable average compressive stress under concentric loading, under concentric loading, and sigma TFO is elastic torsional flexural buckling stress under concentric loading, which shall be determined as follows. The one, for singly symmetric shapes, sigma TFO is equal to 1 by 2 beta multiplied by sigma EX plus sigma T minus sigma under root sigma EX plus sigma T whole square minus 4 beta sigma EX multiplied by sigma T, where sigma X is equal to pi square E divided by KL by Rx whole square, and sigma T is equal to 1 by AR naught square multiplied by J plus pi square E CW divided by KL by divided by KL whole square, and beta is equal to 1 minus x naught divided by r naught whole square, and A is a cross sectional area, and r naught is equal to square root of Rx square plus Ry square minus plus x naught square, which is the polar radius of variation of the cross section about the shear center, right? Rx Ry are the radius of variation of the section about the centroidal principal axis, and G is the shear modulus, which can be taken as 795,000 kg force per centimeter square. It is approximately 0.8 into 10 to the power 5 Newton per mole square. And K is the effective length factor, and L is the unbraced length of the compression member. X naught is the distance from shear center to the centroid along the principal axis. J is the St. Venant's torsion constant, right? And it is given for n segmented section. J is equal to 1 by 3 L1 T1 cubed plus L2 T2 cubed, so on and so forth, Ln Tn cubed. T1 is the steel thickness of the member for segment I1, and L1 is the length of this middle line of line segment I, and Cw is equal to warping constant of torsion of cross section, warping constant, right? Then, however, for non-symmetric shapes, the shapes whose cross section do not have any symmetry, either about any of the axis of about a particular point, sigma TFO shall be determined by rational analysis. Or alternatively, it can be calculated or tested in accordance with the class 9. Next one, singly symmetric or non-symmetric shapes are intermittently fastened singly symmetrical components of built-up shapes having Q is less than 1, which are subjected to torsional flexural buckling. Then, in such a case, now code says that whatever we have seen, the 6.6.1.2, there you replace Fy with QFy, right? Or for the strength, whatever that we have seen in class 6.6.1.1, there also you replace this Q with Fy with QFy, right? Then next one, bracing and secondary members, right? However, if these bracings and secondary members having the L by R ratio, means tonnage ratio exceeding 120, then the compression stress under concentric loading, allowable compressive stress under concentric loading, FAC shall be calculated using this formula. FAC is equal to Fa divided by 1.3 L divided by 400 R, or FAC is equal to FAS actually, right? FAS is equal to Fa divided by 1.3 standardized ratio divided by 400. Right? Now next one is maximum standardized ratio. The maximum standardized ratio KL by R of the compression member shall not exceed 200, except during the construction it can be permitted up to 300 KL by R not greater than 300, right? Now let us see the next subheading as a combined axial and bending stresses, students, right? I hope you are understanding the discussions. Double reinforced shapes are shapes not subjected to torsional or torsional flexural buckling. Then Fa divided by Fa1 plus Cmx multiplied by Fbx divided by 1 minus Fa divided by F prime Ex multiplied by Fbx plus Cmy multiplied by fby divided by 1 minus fa divided by fey prime multiplied by fby. This ratio, this is actually a unity check, should be less than or equal to 1. That is what called a unity check, right? Combined unity check, right? That is now given by fa divided by fac, means in the numerator we would have actual value, in the denominator we would have permissible value, right? That of the compression, and that of the bending about x-axis fbx divided by fb1x, and bending about y-axis, right? fby divided by fb1y, 1y should be less than or equal to 1, right? Where fa divided by fa1, when f1 divided by fa1 is less than 0.15, then the formula is like this: fa divided by fa1 plus fbx divided by fbx plus fby divided by fby should be less than or equal to 1, right? Should be less than or equal to 1. The next one, singly symmetric shapes are intermittently fastened singly symmetric components of built-up shapes having q is equal to 1, which may be subjected to torsional flexural buckling, right? Then this is of the formula: fa divided by fa1 plus fb1 multiplied by cm divided by fb1 multiplied by 1 minus fa divided by fe prime should be less than or equal to 1, or that is now given by fa divided by fac plus fb1 divided by actual bending stress divided by permissible bending stress fb1 should be less than or equal to 1, should be less than or equal to 1. That is what unity check. Then where if at all fa divided by fa1 is less than or equal to 0.5, then however what we can use is fa divided by fa1 plus fb1 divided by fb1 should be less than or equal to 1. Now the second one, if the point of application of the eccentric load is located on the side of the centroid opposite from that of the shear center, then for sigma tf greater than 0.5 fy, fa is equal to 0.522 fy minus fy square divided by 7.67 sigma tf. If at all sigma tf is less than or equal to 0.5 fy, then fa is equal to 0.522 sigma tf, right? And where sigma tf shall be determined according to this formula: sigma tf divided by sigma tfo, right? Actual by permissible plus sigma tf sigma 1 multiplied by ctf divided by sigma bt multiplied by 1 minus sigma tf divided by sigma e should be 1, right? Using this unity combined iteration formula, unity formula, right? Now, except that for T are unsymmetric eye sections, if points of application of the eccentric load is between the shear center and the centroid, then fa is equal to fa2 plus e divided by x naught multiplied by fae minus fa2. For T and unsymmetric eye sections with negative eccentricities, if at all we do have negative eccentricities within that first one, point of application of eccentric load is in between the shear center and the centroid, then fa is equal to fa2 plus e divided by x naught plus fac minus fa2, right? Then if the point of application of eccentric load is located on the side of the shear center opposite from that of the centroid, on opposite to that of the actually shear center on the opposite to that of the centroid, then the average compressive stress fa shall also not exceed fa given by this formula. Therefore, if sigma tf is greater than 0.5 multiplied by fi, then fa is equal to 0.522 fi minus fi square divided by 7.67 sigma tf. If at all sigma tf is less than 0.5 fi, then fa is equal to 0.522 sigma tf, where sigma tf is given by this unity formula: sigma tf divided by sigma ex plus sigma tf divided by sigma bc multiplied by sigma b1 divided by 1 minus sigma tf divided by sigma e minus sigma b2 should be unit value, 1 value, right? Now, where cm is a coefficient in these equations, cm is a coefficient whose value shall be taken as follows: for compression members in frames subjected to joint translation sideways, cm is equal to 0.85. For restrained compression members in frames braced against joint translation and not subject to transverse loading between their supports in the plane of the bending. Then Cm is given by 0.6 minus 0.4 m1 divided by m2, but not less than 0.4. Not less than 0.4, where m1 is the smaller bending moment and m2 is the larger bending moment. Right? For compression members in frames braced against the joint translation in the plane of loading and subject to transverse loading between their supports. Now, for members whose ends are restrained, then Cm is equal to 0.85. Second one, for members whose ends are unrestrained, Cm is equal to 1. Cm is equal to 1. And CTF, a coefficient shall be taken as follows: 1 for compression members in frames subjected to joint translation sideways, sigma TF is equal to 0.85. For restrained members having restrained compression members in frames braced against joint translation and not subject to transverse loading, then CT is equal to 0.6 minus 0.4 m1 divided by m2. M1, M2 we already discussed, right? These are the different notations of this formula. You just go through these, students. I will not read, right? These are the different notations of that same formula. And the next one is singly symmetric shapes are intermittently fastened singly symmetric components of built-up shapes having the load factor Q less than 1, which may be subject to torsional flexural buckling. If Q is less than 1, and they shall be proportioned by replacing Fy by QFy in that formula 6.7.2, right? Or even in class 9, you where Q is defined in class 9 as is defined in 6.1.1, right? Now, next one. Similarly, singly symmetric shapes which are non-symmetrically loaded, then also it should be in accordance with the class 9.2. Now, next one is cylindrical tubular members in compression or bending. However, if the ratio of d by t, the mean diameter to the wall thickness, not greater than 23200 divided by Fy, the compression stress shall not exceed the basic design stress F, right? Now, however, for cylindrical tubular members with ratio d by t larger than 23200 divided by Fy, but not greater than 914,000 divided by Fy, then that Fr, the compression stress or compressive stress, Fr is equal to 46,540 divided by d by t plus 0.399 multiplied by Fy, right? However, here Q is taken as 1 as per this 6.6.1.1, 1.1, right? Now, next one is, if you understood that, student, now let us move to the next subheading as the connections, right? Now, however, first one is fusion welds, right? Fusion welds, then the specified minimum yield point of the lowest steel being jointed in terms of kg force per centimeter square. Let us say less than or equal to 2500 kg force per centimeter square or 250 Newton per meter square. Then the permissible stress in shear on throat of the fillet or the plug weld in terms of kg force per centimeter square 955, or it is equal to 95.5. Therefore, for 250 Newton per meter square, we would have 95.5, almost it is approximately 0.4 Fy, right? And if the yield stress is greater than 2500 and less than 3500, then the permissible shear stress is equal to 1100 kg force per centimeter square. And if Fy is greater than 3500, then the permissible shear stress is equal to 1250 kg force per centimeter square or 125 Newton per mm square. Then next one is, if resistance welds are used, then in sheets joined by spot welding, generally they are joined by the resistance welds, then the thickness of the thinnest outside sheet, let us say if that is equal to 0.25 mm, then allowable shear stress or strength per spot is equal to 23 kg. Like that, for different thickness varying from 0.25 to 5 mm, the maximum allowable shear stress or strength strength is given, not stress, student, right? Allowable shear strength per spot, per each of this spot is equal to 18 kg, 18 kg, right? That is how the values are defined for allowable shear strength for the welding, right? Next one, connecting two channels to form I section. Connecting two channels to form I section, like this, right? Two channels may be connected. Right? Now I'm just showing angles, right? Just I'm showing angles like this, right? To form an I section, right? Therefore, for compression, the maximum permissible longitudinal spacing of welds are other connections, right? Here I may be welding using spot welding, right? Spot welding. I may be welding here and here, right? Using spot welding. Therefore, that is how the maximum permissible longitudinal spacing of webs or other connectors S maximum joining the two channels to form an I section. For compression members, S maximum is equal to L RCY divided by 2R1, where L is the unbraced length and RCY is the radius of gyration of one channel about its central axis parallel to the web, and R1 is the radius of gyration of this I section about the axis perpendicular to the direction of the buckling. Second one, for flexural members, the maximum spacing S max is equal to S by 6. In no case the S maximum should exceed, S maximum should not be greater than 2G TS divided by MQ, where L is the span of the beam and G is the vertical distance between the two rows of connections near or at top and bottom of flanges, right? That is how that is actually the gauge distance, right? TS is equal to strength of the connection in tension, and M is the distance of the shear center of the channel from mid plane of the web. For single channels without stiffening lips at the outer edges, M is given by WF square divided by 2 WF plus D by 3, and Q is the intensity of the load on the beam. For C-shaped channels with stiffening lips at outer edges, M is given by WF dt divided by 4 Ix multiplied by WF d plus 2 d1 multiplied by d minus 4 by 3 d1 square divided by d, right? Where WF is a projection of the flame from inside face of the web. Projection of this flange from inside face of this web, right? And D is the depth of the channel section, and D1 is the overall depth of the lip. This overall depth of this lip, right? Here I'm showing just a lip, right? Overall depth of this lip, right? And Ix is the moment of inertia of one channel about the central axis normal to the web, right? Now let us move to the next discussion. Spacing of connections in compression members. The spacing S in line of stress of welds, rivets or bolts connecting the compression cover plate or sheets to a non-integral stiffener or other elements shall not exceed these, right? One, that which is required to transmit the shear between the connected parts on the basis of the design strength per connection specified, right? Therefore, it is based upon the shear strength, right? Or 1680 T divided by square root of F, right? Then or 3 times the flat width W of the narrowest unstiffened compression element, narrowest unstiffened compression element, right? However, that value but not less than 1590 T divided by square root of Fy, right? If value of Fc permitted in the unstiffened element is greater than 0.54 Fy or 1910 T divided by square root of Fy, right? Then if the value of Fc permitted in the unstiffened element is 0.54 Fy or less, right? 0.45 Fy or less, right? Then closer spacing may be provided as required under this A or B may be provided, right? If these three conditions for different conditions, you please see these discussions, right? Then the next subheading is bolted connections, right? However, the minimum spacing and edge distance in line of the stress shall not be less than 1.5 D nor less than P divided by 0.6 Fi multiplied by T, where D is the diameter of the bolt and P is the force transmitted by the bolt and T is the thickness of the thinnest connected sheet and Fi is the yield stress. And tension stress in on net section, tension stress on, generally they will be calculated on net sections like this after deduction of the due holes, right. Then it on the net section shall not exceed 0.6 Fi nor exceed this value given by 1 minus 0.9 R plus 3 RD divided by S multiplied by 0.6 Fi, where R is the force transmitted by the bolt or bolts at section considered, right. If R is less than 0.2, then it may be taken equal to 0, and S is the spacing of the bolts perpendicular to the line of the stress, right. The next one is the bearing stress in bolted connections, right, shall be given by this formula D multiplied by T. The stress should be on the area, bearing area, D multiplied by T, and shall not exceed 2.1 multiplied by Fi. The next one is shear stress on the bolts, right. However, if precision and semi-precision bolts are used, then the shear stress in the bolts is 970 kg force per centimeter square or 97 Newton per mm square, or black bolts are used, then 820 kg force per centimeter square or 82 Newton per mm square, and still conforming to the class 4.6, then it should be 1060 kg force per centimeter square or 106 Newton per mm square. Then next one. What are the bracing requirements for the wall struts? Even I have already shown what are these wall struts, right. Then for such wall struts, right, the maximum spacing of the attachment of the wall material to the stud being braced shall not exceed sigma maximum as determined from the formula, right. This formula, sigma maximum is equal to 8 EI2 kW divided by A square Fi square, right. However, the slenderness ratio of the stud between the attachment is greater than A by R2. However, shall not exceed L by 2R1, right. Now, the spacing of the attachment shall not exceed the specified above, nor shall exceed sigma maximum. The upper bound value for this one is in any case not greater than LR2 divided by 2R1. LR2 divided by 2R1 in any case, right. The minimum modulus of elastic support KW to be exerted laterally by the wall material and its attachment in order to brace the stud shall not be less than KW is equal to Fi square multiplied by A square divided by 8 EI2, right. And the lateral force in kg which each single attachment of the wall material shall be capable of exerting on the stud in the plane of the wall is given by this formula. P minimum is equal to KW PB L divided by 240 under root EI2 KW divided by A minus P3, right. However, in this formula, A is equal to the actual spacing of attachment of wall material to stud measured along the length of the stud. A is equal to 1 for continuous attachments, and other notations you please see, where KW is equal to modulus of elastic support of wall material and its attachment, and it is given by KW is equal to P by E, where P is the force which produces an elongation of E in the strip of the wall material of width A and length equal to a distance between the adjacent studs, right. Now we will see a numerical problem also with respect to this design formula, student. Then you will understand the application, right. Then next one is PU is equal to desired load on the stud, and R1 is the radius of gyration of the stud about its axis parallel to the wall, square root of I1 divided by A, and R2 is the radius of gyration of the stud about an axis perpendicular to the wall, square root of I2 divided by A. And next one is channel or Z section used as beams, right. Then first one is the spacing of beams, right. The braces shall be attached both to the top and bottom flanges of the section at ends or intervals not greater than one quarter of the span length in such a manner that as to prevent tipping at the ends and lateral reflection of either flange in either direction at intermediate braces, right. if 1/3 or more of the total load on the beams is concentrated over a length of 1/12 or less the span of the beam, an additional brace shall also be placed near the center of this loaded length, right? That is how the spacing of the bracings. Next one, the design of these braces, right? Each of these intermediate braces at the top and bottom shall be designed to resist a lateral load P1, lateral load P1 determined as under, right? As under, where P1 is equal to 1.5 K prime times the load within a distance of 0.5 A1 each on each side of the brace, However, for concentrated loads, this P1 is equal to 1 multiplied by K prime times the concentrated load P within a distance of 0.3 A on each side of the brace plus this one divided by 0.7 multiplied by 1 minus x by A P K prime for such concentrated load P located farther than 0.3 but not farther than A from the base, this formula, right? Whereas the first one is, if it is located at a distance of 0.3 A, then P1 is equal to 1 multiplied by K prime. If it is more than 0.3 A and less than 1, then it is 1 divided by 0.7 multiplied by 1 minus x by A P K prime. However, in this above formula for channels, K prime is given by M by D, where M is the distance from the shear center to the mid plane and is the depth, and for Z sections, then K prime is equal to IXY divided by IXY, where IXY is the product inertia, means moment of inertia about XY plane, product of inertia of the full section, where Ix is the moment of inertia of the full section about the centroidal axis perpendicular to the web, whereas for channels and Z sections, X is the distance from the concentrated load P to the brace and A is the length of the bracing interval, right? Now once we see this, let us go to the allowable stresses. They should be in accordance with 8.2.1 and 8.2.2 as seen in 6.3. As seen, the maximum compression stress is as seen in class 6.3. Next one is laterally unbraced box beams, right? Closed box type sections used as beams subjected to bending about the major axis. The ratio of laterally unsupported length to distance between the webs of the section shall not exceed 175,700 divided by Fy. Right? Next one is the discussions on these are the different types of the stresses and their spacing, students, right? Next one is stress for special cases. I think I'll not go through this. You may just go through these. What are the stresses, right? Tests. What are the different tests, student, right? I'll just read the headings, right? The first one is general. The second one is the test for determining the mechanical properties of a formed section of a flat members, right? And the acceptance criteria, etc., right? That is how the compression testing should be done, right? Is defined, right? I hope, student, you understood the discussions what we had in today's class, right? On the IS codal specifications, using IS 801, right? Now, if you like these discussions, you try to click like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We'll meet with the next discussions with further discussions on the same topic using SP65, right? Till then, bye bye, students.